The cabin doors had just closed, and the hum of the aircraft filled the air as passengers settled into their seats. Flight attendants moved swiftly through the aisles, their polished uniforms and rehearsed smiles creating an atmosphere of efficiency and control. Among them was Olivia, a senior flight attendant who prided herself on maintaining order. To her, first class wasn't just about comfort, it was about exclusivity. She adjusted her blazer, glancing toward the entrance of the first-class cabin, where a young girl, no older than 10, stood clutching a ticket. The girl had deep brown skin, her curly hair neatly tied up with a silk ribbon. She wore a stylish yet simple outfit, a pastel-colored dress paired with ballet flats. Her wide, curious eyes scanned the plush seats as she stepped forward. Olivia's brows furrowed. Something about this didn't seem right. She glanced at the boarding pass in the child's hand. "Excuse me, sweetheart," Olivia said, her voice artificially sweet. "Are you lost? Economy is just behind this curtain." The girl's eyes flickered with confusion. "I'm not lost," she said politely, handing over her boarding pass. "My seat is 2A. Olivia took the ticket, expecting to find an error. But there it was, 2A. First class. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Mistakes happened all the time. Perhaps a gate agent had misprinted the ticket. She forced another smile. "Oh, honey," she said, kneeling slightly. "This section is for first-class passengers only." The girl straightened her shoulders. "I know." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the confidence in her voice. "You see," she continued, "first-class seats are very expensive. Maybe your parents booked you a seat in the other section?" The girl frowned. "No, my dad booked this seat for me." Olivia's smile wavered. She scanned the girl's clothes again. Not designer, nothing overly luxurious. Just neat, well-chosen pieces. There was no way she belonged in first class. She sighed. Standing up, "Why don't we go check with the gate agent?" Before the girl could protest, Olivia gestured for another attendant to escort her out. As the girl hesitantly turned, a murmur spread through first class. Some passengers simply watched, uninterested, while others frowned at the interaction. Near the window, a businessman in a tailored suit adjusted his glasses. "Seems odd, doesn't it?" he muttered to the woman next to him. "If the girl has a first-class ticket, what's the problem?" The woman nodded slightly, her gaze following the child. "Some people assume they know who belongs here and who doesn't." Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, the young girl was led to the front desk. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a warm demeanor, immediately recognized her. "Oh, there you are. We were wondering when you'd board," the agent said with a smile. She turned to the flight attendant. "Is something wrong?" Olivia crossed her arms. "She claims she's seated in 2A. That can't be correct." The agent frowned, pulling up the passenger manifest. After a few clicks, she nodded. "It's correct. 2A, first class." Olivia stiffened. "Are you sure?" The agent gave her a pointed look. "Very sure." The girl turned back to Olivia, her expression unreadable. "Can I go to my seat now?" There was no argument left to make. Olivia clenched her jaw, then forced a smile. "Of course," she said, voice tight. She led the girl back through the aisle, past the same watching eyes. As they re-entered first class, Olivia kept her voice low. "Just try not to disturb anyone, okay?" The girl gave a small nod, but she said nothing. She settled into seat 2A, adjusting the seatbelt as the flight attendant walked away. Olivia's cheeks burned as she moved toward the galley. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was irritated. Something about the situation didn't sit right with her. She needed answers, and soon, she would get them. Olivia stormed into the galley, her mind racing. How had that little girl gotten a first-class seat? A mistake? A favor from some employee? No matter the reason, it didn't sit right with her. First class was for a certain type of passenger, executives, celebrities, high-profile travelers, not an unaccompanied child who didn't fit the image of wealth Olivia had in mind. She pulled out the passenger list and skimmed through it again. Seat 2A. Passenger. Ava Sinclair. There was no additional information. No sign of a parent's name attached to the reservation. That only frustrated her more. One of her fellow attendants, Rachel, stepped into the galley, raising an eyebrow. "What's with you?" Olivia huffed. That little girl in 2A. Something feels off. Rachel grabbed a bottle of water, glancing toward the first-class cabin. What do you mean? She doesn't look like she belongs in first class. Rachel froze mid-sip. Excuse me? I mean, Olivia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. She's alone. No parents. No expensive luggage. Just doesn't seem like the kind of passenger we usually get up here. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. Olivia, she said slowly, do you hear yourself? Olivia's irritation flared. I'm just saying. Rachel shook her head, cutting her off. Look, you saw her boarding pass, right? If she's booked in first class, then that's the end of it. You don't decide who belongs here. Olivia didn't respond, but she felt her pulse quicken. Rachel didn't get it. There was something more to this. She could feel it. Back in the first-class cabin, Ava sat quietly, gazing out the window. She had sensed the tension from the moment she walked in. She wasn't new to these looks, the double takes, the silent questioning stares. People often hesitated when they saw her in spaces they didn't expect her to be. But she didn't care. Her dad had always told her, you don't have to prove you belong. You just do. So she ignored the flight attendant's behavior, though a small part of her wondered why some adults still acted this way. A man in the seat next to her, probably in his late 50s, glanced over and smiled. Flying alone? Ava nodded. My dad's waiting for me at the airport. Big trip? She shrugged. Kind of. The man chuckled. Well, enjoy first class. You must have a great dad if he booked you this seat. Ava smiled politely but said nothing. A few rows ahead, Olivia emerged from the galley, observing Ava again. This wasn't over. She needed more information. As she moved through the cabin, she stopped by Ava's seat, forcing a professional smile. Can I get you something to drink, sweetie? Ava looked up. Orange juice, please. Olivia nodded, making a note of it. Then, casually, she added, so, are you excited for your trip? Visiting family? Ava hesitated, sensing something in Olivia's tone. Yeah, my dad's meeting me when we land. Olivia feigned curiosity. That's nice. What does he do? Ava tilted her head slightly. He owns an airline. Olivia nearly laughed. An airline? She had heard kids exaggerate before, but this was a stretch. Oh, does he? She said, keeping her tone light. That's impressive. Which one? Ava looked her dead in the eyes. This one. Olivia's smile faltered. She stared at the girl, trying to process what she had just heard. Was this some kind of joke? Ava simply turned back to the window, unfazed. Olivia scoffed internally. No way. She had to be making that up. Still, something about Ava's confidence unsettled her. She turned quickly and walked back to the galley, her mind racing. She needed to confirm this. Immediately, Olivia's heels clicked sharply against the galley floor as she reached for the in-flight phone. She had to confirm this ridiculous claim. A child saying her father owned an airline? It was laughable. She dialed the number for the gate agents, her patience wearing thin. This is Olivia, flight attendant on Flight 407. I need some verification on a first-class passenger. A static-filled pause. Go ahead. Seat 2A. Ava Sinclair. She claims her father owns this airline. Can you check if she's flying under any special privileges? There was a longer silence this time, followed by a hesitant voice. Olivia, are you aware of who her father is? Her grip on the receiver tightened. No, that's why I'm asking. A slow exhale came through the line. Her father is Richard Sinclair. He's the CEO of this airline. Olivia felt like the ground had been pulled from beneath her feet. Wait, what? You heard me. He owns the airline. Ava isn't flying under any special privileges. Her seat was booked just like any other first-class passenger. Except, she technically owns all the seats. Olivia's stomach twisted. This couldn't be real. The little girl she had dismissed, interrogated, and humiliated in front of the entire first-class cabin was the daughter of the man who signed her paycheck. She forced a laugh, hoping to mask her shock. Right. Well, thanks for the confirmation. She hung up, her fingers trembling slightly. This was bad. Very bad. Rachel walked in just as Olivia leaned against the counter, rubbing her temples. What now? Olivia hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. That girl in 2A, she exhaled sharply. She's Richard Sinclair's daughter. Rachel blinked. The Richard Sinclair? The CEO. The owner of this airline. The man who could have us both fired before this plane even lands. Rachel's eyes widened. Olivia, tell me you didn't say anything rude to her. Silence. Rachel groaned, rubbing her face. You have got to be kidding me. Olivia squared her shoulders. Okay, it's fine. I'll smooth it over. I'll be extra nice. Kids forget things easily. Rachel shook her head. She might, but her father won't. And let's not pretend like you weren't acting out of line. Olivia ignored the jab and grabbed a tray with Ava's orange juice. She had to fix this before it got worse. She approached Ava's seat, this time with a rehearsed warmth in her voice. Here's your orange juice, sweetie. I also brought you some warm cookies on the house. Ava glanced at the cookies but didn't reach for them. Thank you, she said simply. Olivia smiled tightly. So, Ava, I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome earlier. It was just a misunderstanding. Ava met her gaze, her young eyes filled with a quiet knowing. A misunderstanding? Olivia nodded quickly. Yes, I didn't realize who you were. Ava tilted her head. And if I wasn't who I am, would it still be a misunderstanding? Olivia's breath caught in her throat. This kid was sharp. Ava took a sip of her juice, then turned back to the window. I'd like to enjoy my flight now. Heat rushed to Olivia's cheeks. She turned stiffly and walked away, feeling the weight of every passenger's eyes on her. She had been dismissed by a child, and for the first time in her career, she realized she might have just made the worst mistake of her life. Olivia returned to the galley, her mind spinning. The way Ava had dismissed her so effortlessly, like she was insignificant, stung more than she cared to admit. But it wasn't just the dismissal. It was the terrifying realization that she had crossed the wrong person. She had insulted the daughter of the airline CEO. Rachel stood nearby, arms crossed. Well, how'd that go? Olivia exhaled sharply. She didn't accept my apology. Rachel gave a slow nod. Smart kid. Olivia shot her a glare. This isn't funny. If she tells her father. Rachel raised an eyebrow. If? Olivia, do you really think she's not going to mention this? She's sitting in first class, being treated like she doesn't belong. You really think the CEO's daughter is just going to let that slide? Olivia swallowed hard. She needed to do damage control. The problem was, she didn't know how. The flight continued smoothly, but for Olivia, every second felt like an eternity. Every time she passed by Ava's seat, she felt the weight of her own mistake pressing down on her. She tried to act normal, but the tension sat thick in the air. Meanwhile, Ava remained calm. She wasn't fuming, she wasn't making a scene. She simply existed in her space, as if Olivia's behavior was beneath her. And that made Olivia's anxiety skyrocket. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly at JFK Airport. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened as we begin our descent. Olivia's breath caught. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Once they landed, Ava would walk off this plane, straight into the arms of the most powerful man in the airline industry. And Olivia had no idea how much of their encounter Ava would share with him. Rachel patted Olivia's shoulder. Well, it was nice working with you. Olivia shot her a glare. Not funny. Rachel shrugged. I warned you. As the plane descended, Olivia's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Would she be fired immediately? Blacklisted from the industry? Humiliated in front of the entire staff? She forced a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and braced herself. Whatever was coming, there was no stopping it now. The plane touched down smoothly at JFK Airport, but for Olivia, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare. As passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, she kept stealing glances at Ava, hoping, praying, that she wouldn't mention anything to her father. Ava, on the other hand, looked completely at ease. She calmly placed her headphones into her backpack, adjusted her jacket, and waited patiently as the flight attendants opened the cabin doors. She didn't seem angry. She didn't seem vengeful. That terrified Olivia even more. As first-class passengers began exiting, Olivia's stomach twisted into knots. Then, Ava stood up. She walked toward the front of the plane, her steps light, her expression unreadable. Olivia forced herself to keep a professional smile, but inside, her heart was pounding. And then, just as Ava reached the exit, it happened. A tall man in an expensive suit stepped into the jet bridge, his presence commanding the space instantly. Richard Sinclair, the CEO. Olivia had seen his face in company emails and news articles, but seeing him in person made her knees weak. He wasn't just a powerful businessman. He was a legend in the airline industry. Ava's face lit up the moment she saw him. "Daddy," she said cheerfully, running up to hug him. Richard Sinclair bent down and embraced his daughter warmly. "Hey, sweetheart, how was your flight?" Ava glanced back, just for a second, locking eyes with Olivia. Then she turned back to her father and smiled. "It was interesting." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Interesting?" Ava shrugged. "I'll tell you about it later." Olivia's blood ran cold. Richard's gaze flickered toward the first-class cabin, his sharp eyes scanning the flight crew. Olivia swore his stare lingered on her for just a moment too long. "Everything all right, Mr. Sinclair?" the lead flight attendant asked with a polite smile. Richard nodded, placing a protective hand on Ava's shoulder. "I'm sure I'll find out soon enough." And just like that, he turned and walked away, leading Ava toward the private escort waiting for them. Olivia felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. Rachel leaned in. "So, do you think she's going to tell him everything?" Olivia didn't respond. She just stood there, watching as Ava disappeared into the crowd. One thing was certain, her fate was no longer in her hands. As the last of the passengers disembarked, Olivia stood frozen near the galley, her pulse hammering. The first-class cabin was empty now, but the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. Rachel sighed, adjusting her uniform. "Well, that was intense." Olivia didn't respond. She was still replaying Ava's final glance, her cryptic words to her father. It was interesting. What did that mean? Would Ava let this go? Or had Olivia just signed her own termination papers? The crew gathered near the exit as the captain stepped out of the cockpit. He exchanged a few words with the lead flight attendant before turning to the team. "All right, great job, everyone. We'll be debriefing in 30 minutes. Olivia swallowed hard. Debriefing. Was that normal, or was this something else? She needed air. Without a word, she grabbed her bag and stepped out of the plane. The terminal was busy with passengers rushing to their next destinations, but Olivia's focus was locked on one thing, Ava and her father. She spotted them near the VIP lounge entrance, a few security personnel standing nearby. Ava was talking animatedly, her father nodding as he listened. Olivia's stomach twisted. She couldn't hear the conversation, but then, as if sensing her gaze, Ava looked over. Their eyes met for just a second before Ava turned back to her father and continued speaking. Then, Richard Sinclair's expression changed. His brow furrowed slightly, his gaze sharpened, and then he turned his head, directly at Olivia. A chill ran down her spine. Rachel appeared beside her. "He's looking at you." "I know." Olivia felt an invisible pressure settle over her, a silent, crushing weight. Then, Richard said something to Ava, nodded, and began walking toward the airline's executive offices. Ava, however, stayed behind. And then, she smiled. Not a smirk, not a look of triumph. A simple, knowing smile. Then, with one last glance, she turned and disappeared into the VIP lounge. Rachel nudged Olivia. "That smile, what do you think it means?" Olivia exhaled shakily. "I have no idea." But as she stood there in the terminal, watching the doors close behind Ava Sinclair, she realized one thing. Her fate had already been decided. She just didn't know what it was yet. The airport terminal buzzed with activity, but for Olivia, everything felt muted, like she was trapped in a slow-motion nightmare. The moment Ava disappeared into the VIP lounge, Olivia knew. Her time with this airline was hanging by a thread. Rachel checked her watch. "We should head to debriefing." Olivia nodded numbly, following her crew through the corridors leading to the airline's employee area. Her mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Ava would forget the whole thing. Maybe she wouldn't even tell her father. Or maybe, just maybe, Olivia was already a walking ghost, fired before she even clocked out. Inside the briefing room, the usual post-flight discussions began, but Olivia barely heard a word. Then, just as they were about to wrap up, the lead flight attendant's radio crackled. Olivia Carter, report to the airline executive offices immediately. The room fell silent. Rachel mouthed, "Oh, my God." Olivia felt her stomach drop. The lead attendant gave her a pitying look. Better not keep them waiting. With shaky hands, Olivia grabbed her bag and made her way through the terminal, past security checkpoints, up the sleek glass elevator leading to the executive wing. She had never been up here before. Only senior management and VIP personnel had access. At the reception desk, a woman in a sharp black suit glanced up. "Miss Carter?" Olivia nodded, barely able to find her voice. "Yes. Right this way." The hallway was eerily quiet. Every step felt heavier than the last. And then, she was led into a grand office, minimalist, modern, and intimidating. At the desk, standing tall, was Richard Sinclair, the man who owned this airline, the man who now held her career in his hands. "Have a seat," he said, his voice calm but unreadable. Olivia obeyed, feeling the leather chair swallow her whole. Richard studied her for a moment, then leaned forward. "Do you know why you're here?" Her throat was dry. I assume it's about Ava." He nodded slowly. "She told me everything." Olivia's hands clenched in her lap. "You assumed she didn't belong in first class," he continued. "You questioned her, dismissed her, treated her differently because you couldn't imagine someone like her in that seat." Olivia's heart pounded. "Mr. Sinclair, He raised a hand, silencing her. "I've seen this before," he said, his voice steady. "People judging my daughter before they know who she is, assuming she doesn't belong. And frankly, I'm tired of it." Olivia swallowed hard. This was it. She was done. But then, Richard leaned back, his expression shifting. "However," her breath caught. "She told me something else." He folded his hands on the desk. "She said you realized your mistake." Olivia blinked. "She told me you apologized," Richard continued. "That you tried too late, maybe, but you tried to make it right." A lump formed in Olivia's throat. Richard exhaled. "So, tell me, Olivia, what have you learned from this?" The question caught her off guard. What had she learned? That a child had handled the situation with more grace than she had? That her biases had nearly cost her everything? Finally, she spoke. "That belonging isn't something I get to decide." Richard studied her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Good answer." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, Richard grabbed a folder, signed something, and slid it across the desk. "I'm not firing you." Olivia's breath hitched. "But," he continued, "you're being reassigned. Sensitivity training, probation, and a demotion to economy class flights for now." Relief flooded her, but she knew better than to celebrate. "This is your second chance," Richard said firmly. "Don't waste it." She nodded quickly. "I won't." Richard stood. "Good. Now, get out of my office." Olivia didn't need to be told twice. As she stepped out, she saw Ava in the waiting area, swinging her feet casually. Their eyes met once more. Ava gave her the same small, knowing smile, and this time, Olivia smiled back. As Olivia stepped out of the executive offices, she felt like she had just walked away from the edge of a cliff. The reality of what had just happened settled over her. She had come this close to losing everything. She was still employed. Barely. But she wasn't the same person who had walked onto that flight just hours ago. Rachel was waiting for her near the employee lounge, arms crossed. "Well?" Olivia let out a shaky breath. "I still have a job." Rachel's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, really?" "I got demoted. Economy class flights. Sensitivity training. Probation." Rachel let out a low whistle. "Could have been worse." Olivia nodded. "It should have been worse." She sank into a chair, the exhaustion finally hitting her. "He could have fired me. Honestly, I deserved it." Rachel studied her. "So, what happens now?" "I prove I belong here," Olivia said simply. Rachel smirked. That's a nice change of attitude. Olivia gave a small, tired smile. Yeah. Funny what almost losing everything does to a person. Across the terminal, she caught a glimpse of the VIP lounge entrance. Ava was still there, sitting with her father, sipping a drink like nothing had happened. For a moment, Olivia considered going over, maybe thanking her, maybe apologizing one last time. But Ava didn't need that. She had already moved on. And maybe it was time for Olivia to do the same. With a deep breath, she stood up. She had flights to work, passengers to serve, and a reputation to rebuild. This time, she'd do it right. The next morning, Olivia walked into the airline's employee terminal with a different mindset. The usual chatter of flight attendants preparing for their shifts filled the break room, but she felt like an outsider now. She wasn't the same woman who had confidently stepped onto that first-class flight yesterday. Now, she was just another flight attendant, back to working economy class, the section she had once looked down upon. She spotted Rachel near the coffee machine, who raised an eyebrow. Ready for your first punishment flight? Olivia sighed. Might as well get used to it. Rachel smirked. You'll survive. But Olivia wasn't so sure. Boarding time. As she stepped onto the plane, she instinctively turned toward first class before catching herself. That wasn't her section anymore. Instead, she walked toward economy, where passengers were already stuffing oversized bags into overhead compartments and arguing over window seats. Gone were the pristine white linens, the complimentary champagne, the luxury. This was different, loud, chaotic. And yet, something shifted inside her as she watched a young mother struggle to calm her crying baby while juggling bags. An elderly man hesitated, looking for a place to store his cane. A nervous teenage girl clutched her boarding pass, glancing around anxiously. For the first time, Olivia saw it clearly. These were the people who truly needed her. Not because they were paying thousands for a premium experience, but because they were just trying to get from one place to another, hoping someone would treat them with kindness along the way. Taking a deep breath, Olivia stepped forward. Let me help you with that, she said to the mother, reaching for her bags. The woman looked at her, exhausted and grateful. Oh, thank you so much. Olivia nodded, smiling genuinely. And just like that, she realized this wasn't a demotion. It was a second chance, a real one. And this time, she wouldn't waste it.